South Africa has been experiencing economic headwinds over a decade, with economic growth averaging 1%, while population growth per annum has consistently been more than that, which has led to economists to talk about a lower GDP per capita or per head after the economic devastation wrought by COVID-19 and global central banks' responses to inflation, including the Reserve Bank, as well as energy and logistics constraints. The economy has struggled to gain traction. But with a number of economic variables set to change and a new government that seems intent on pushing the necessary economic reforms, could the future look brighter for the economy? Well, to share some insights with us, I'm joined by Shannon Bold. She's senior economist for macroeconomic modelling and forecasting at the Bureau of Economic Research. Quite a mouthful there, Shannon. Thank you very much for joining us. Just give us an overview of how you see the current South African economic landscape and the factors that you see contributing to this.
Of course. Thank you for having me this afternoon. So this is quite an interesting week for the economy. So tomorrow we've actually got the second quarter GDP print coming out. You would have seen in the first quarter we had a negative growth, and we're expecting a modest recovery in the second quarter, especially because of energy availability that improved during the quarter. But unfortunately, that first quarter figure did give us a low base for 2024. So for 2024, we're expecting around 1% of growth. And then going into 2025, we're expecting over 2% of GDP growth. A lot of that has to do with the low base, but we're also expecting a lot of improvements on the logistical side, so that should be less of a constraint. Energy, as you've mentioned, is improving, and that should also go into next year. When we start a shallow cutting cycle with inflation that's coming down quite nicely, that should be supportive of household consumption expenditure and hopefully also investment. We also have, on Wednesday, we have the BER business confidence coming out, and hopefully we'll see an uptick in that. That would also lead to positive investment decisions going into next year.
Yeah. Now, Shannon, how effective do you think the Government of National Unity is going to be in implementing its reform agenda?
I think obviously there's will. We are seeing there's a lot of will, and there are a lot of positive movements, although a lot of it will need to be maintained going beyond 2025 for us to be positive for growth 2026 onwards. So for now, we don't have growth above 2% from 26 onwards because we want to see sustained implementation of those reforms. I think there are some low-hanging fruits, and we've seen a lot of positive movements, especially in the visa space, in the SOE space, but I think there are definitely some focused interventions that need to take place for growth to actually sustain at the 2 handle.
The country is seemingly getting on top of the energy crisis, but water has been cited as a key concern. To what extent do you think that the new Water Infrastructure Agency will be able to address, number one, water shortages and ultimately support economic stability?
I think water and also local government are the 2 biggest risks for growth that we see at the moment, although energy, we're not fully out the woods. Private sector participation has helped us to get availability up and running, but now we need to get that private renewable energy onto the grid through transmission. So there's a lot of investment in the pipeline for that, hopefully. And hopefully we'll also have pipeline investment for water infrastructure, because there is a shocking statistic that about 40% of our water is just leaked out of our pipes, and that's just because of infrastructure. So I think we need a lot more investment in water infrastructure, and that also ties in very tightly with local government services.
You know, you talk about water infrastructure, but infrastructure more broadly. I remember at the opening of Parliament address, President Ramaphosa emphasizing on the issue of infrastructure and saying it's one thing for us to invest in it, but we actually need to maintain it. There's been a culture for many years of not maintaining infrastructure. Presumably that's going to be very key going forward, because we don't want in the next 20 or 30 years to be faced with similar problems.
Exactly. That's the thing with electricity, is there's always a solution. You can put on a generator, there's diesel, there's paraffin, there's other sources of energy. With water, if you don't have that, it's very difficult both on the production and consumption side of the economy. So I think that was one of the biggest mistakes, was not maintaining that infrastructure, and hopefully that's going to be the focus going forward, especially with the individual responsibilities that are coming through. I think there should be more accountability, hopefully, going forward, and that should help the situation.
Yeah. So we hear government figures, key government figures, talking about the importance of public-private partnerships. It's something we've been hearing about for the longest time, but it seems as though there's a lot more seriousness about it now. To what extent is that going to be a game changer in helping to change the country's or improve the country's economic fortunes?
I think we need a very easily replicatable blueprint for private sector participation across all the sectors of the economy. I think we're seeing it coming through in the logistics area. They're trying to make it a lot easier for private sector participation, and hopefully that will help for future PPPs in other sectors of the economy to be easily replicatable. I think they need to take a lot of the red tape away, and we need to just focus on the speed that these investments can come online.
So one of the things that you said earlier, you beat me to it, because my last question to you is really, what do you see as the key risks to the South African economic story, even as things begin to start looking good? You mentioned water and municipalities, but I suppose the other issue is that, you know, the GNU is still new, and we obviously would need that to gain momentum such that, you know, this particular government is able to see things through. Because, of course, there are a lot of people who are not in favour of the GNU. So I'm talking about the political uncertainty as well.
Exactly. You just mentioned political uncertainty. That ties in very closely with sentiment, both foreign investment sentiment and local sentiment. And I think also what we mentioned in the beginning, where we spoke about per capita GDP growth, obviously that puts a lot of risk on the fiscus. And then if we do not have the appropriate tax revenues, for example, we won't be able to support the most vulnerable households. So there are things that need to happen on the business side of things. The ability to do business, the red tape needs to come down, corruption needs to come down, but we also still need to be able to support the most vulnerable households through social grants and those kinds of things. So it's a very fine balance that needs to be found. Local government, a big risk for that as well, and then water, and still a little bit on the energy side of things, risks coming through there.
Shannon, thank you so much for your insights. That was Shannon Bold. She's Senior Economist for Macroeconomic Modelling and Forecasting at the BER.